They called him a doctor, a businessman, a man of progress in an age when Chicago burned with ambition. But beneath the polite smile of Herman Webster, much better known as H. Holmes, lay a secret no one was meant to uncover. His story was more than a tale of murder. It was a forbidden history woven into the very fabric of America's Gilded Age, a dark blueprint for how corruption, deception, and human lives could be twisted into profit. Imagine standing before a building that promised comfort, safety, and the progress of modern architecture. Yet behind its walls intentionally designed to deceive a hidden system of control, torture, and vanishing bodies. They called it the Murder Castle, a phrase that dripped with both myth and truth. But tonight, you'll learn that the truth is far more unsettling than the legend. This isn't just about one man's crimes, it's about how institutions, newspapers, and systems of power built the myth, profited from it, and buried the real story beneath layers of lies. You think you know Holmes as the world's fair serial killer, the devil in the White City. But the deeper you look, the more you'll realize the real monster wasn't just Holmes. It was the machinery that let him operate unchecked for years. His charm wasn't just a weapon, it was a mirror reflecting the corruption of his time. And when that mirror cracked, America's obsession with crime, fear, and control was born. What you are about to hear is not a bedtime story. It is a descent into the forbidden side of American history. It is the secret you were never meant to hear, and once you hear it, two cannot unhear it. Tonight, we step into the labyrinth with him. Tonight, you will see the truth no one wanted revealed. This is the forbidden story of H. Holmes. Chicago, 1893, the city of steel, smoke, and promise. The world's Columbian Exposition had risen like a glittering dream, a vision of white marble and electric light meant to show the world that America had arrived as a power. Millions came from across the globe to walk through its streets of wonder. But just a few blocks away, another kind of structure was waiting, built not to awe, but to consume. H. Holmes called it his hotel, a place for weary travelers and dreamers visiting the fair. But its blueprints told a different story. Staircases leading nowhere, rooms without windows, doors that locked only from the outside, hidden chutes that carried bodies straight to the basement. They whispered of a man designing not for comfort but for control, not for lodging but for disappearance. Yet here is the question that gnaws at the truth. How did he build it in plain sight? How did contractors, suppliers, and neighbors see nothing, say nothing, or simply walk away? The deeper you go, the clearer it becomes. This was not one man's madness, but a system of silence. Every institution around him, banks, newspapers, the courts, looked the other way because profit blinded their eyes. Holmes thrived because corruption was the bloodstream of Chicago. And that city, with its hungry towers and unchecked ambition, needed men like Holmes to survive. Think of what it means when society itself becomes the accomplice. Holmes didn't invent the darkness, he simply learned to weaponize it. Every lie, every fraud, every missing person was just another transaction in the ledger of a man who knew that in America, crime could be hidden beneath a handshake and a smile. And so, while fairgoers marveled at electricity, sanitation, and industry in the shadows, Holmes was conducting his own exhibition, a showcase of how fragile life becomes when systems of trust are corrupted. This was no random spree. It was a study in power, how one man could bend others to his will, and how an entire city could become his stage. You must understand, viewer, what you're hearing now isn't just about history, it's a lesson about the architecture of control. about how evil isn't born in shadows, but constructed in daylight. Brick by brick, paper by paper, contract by contract. And as Holmes watched Chicago celebrate progress, he quietly rehearsed the destruction of human souls behind walls no one dared to question. Would you have seen through him? Or would you, like thousands of others, have been caught in his design? Herman Webster Mudgett did not enter the world as a monster, he built himself into one. Step by calculated step, until every lie became part of his armor. Born in 1861 in New Hampshire, he learned early the power of deceit. As a boy, he discovered that manipulation opened doors, that lies could cover shame, and that pain, his own or another's, could be hidden with a smile. He studied medicine, not out of compassion, but out of fascination with control over the human body. At the University of Michigan, he was accused of stealing cadavers, stripping them for bones, and using them to defraud insurance companies. He found profit in death long before he ever built the castle. To him, a body was not sacred, it was currency. By the time he arrived in Chicago, he was no longer Herman Mudgett. He had become Dr. Henry Howard Holmes, a name that carried the dignity of a professional man. That transformation itself is a warning. Evil rarely arrives wearing a mask of horror, it wears respectability. Holmes cultivated charm as a weapon. He could smile, flatter, seduce, and deceive with a precision that disarmed those around him. He married multiple women at once, not out of love, but out of utility, absorbing their money and discarding them when their usefulness ended. His frauds multiplied. Fake insurance claims, swindled suppliers, unpaid debts, and endless schemes that wove him into the city's bloodstream. Yet each scam was only practice, rehearsal for something greater, the creation of a structure that could conceal, control, and destroy without suspicion. The murder castle was not the work of an impulsive killer, but the blueprint of a man who understood systems, how to manipulate workers, how to exploit legal loopholes, how to use the city's ambition as cover for his own. And while the myth of the castle has been exaggerated, eulojournalism painted it as a labyrinth of torture chambers, the truth is no less disturbing. It was a place designed for secrets, a building that itself became an accomplice. Hidden rooms, sealed doors, chutes to the basement, all evidence that Holmes had turned architecture into a tool of erasure. What mattered wasn't how many died inside those walls, but how easily life could vanish without consequence. You must see it clearly. Holmes was not just a killer. He was a mirror reflecting the corruption of an age where greed was virtue and silence was currency. He knew the system was rigged on. He mastered it. Would you call him insane? Or would you admit that in his twisted way, he was simply the purest product of his time? The castle rose brick by brick on the corner of 63rd and Wallace, a structure that seemed ordinary from the street, yet whispered of something unnatural once you crossed its threshold. Neighbors saw a hotel, workers saw their labor, but Holmes saw a stage where he alone was the director. He hired and fired contractors constantly, ensuring no one ever saw the full design. Walls were rebuilt overnight, staircases rerouted, and rooms altered with purpose no one understood. But Holmes understood. Each alteration was a tightening of the net, a secret he alone controlled. This was architecture as weaponry rooms that locked from the outside, airtight chambers where gas lines could slip unseen through the walls, hidden passages that allowed him to appear and vanish like a phantom, and laundry chutes that weren't for linens but for bodies, sliding silently into the cellar where quicklime and fire waited. But perhaps the most disturbing truth is not what was built, but what was allowed to stand. Inspectors came, creditors came, and suppliers came, yet the castle remained. How? Because money moved in the right hands, debts were shuffled, and in a city fueled by ambition. No one wanted to slow down a man who looked successful. Do you see it now? The castle wasn't Holmes' secret alone. It was a collective blindness, a willful ignorance built into every brick. The people around him were too busy, too greedy, or too fearful to see what stood in front of them. And while the newspapers would later describe it as a labyrinth of horror, the real horror was simpler, more terrifying, that society itself will enable a predator if he speaks their language of profit and progress. Picture the fairgoers wandering nearby, marveling at the miracles of the White City, never knowing that in the shadows of the same metropolis, a darker city was being carved, one without justice, one without witnesses. Holmes did not simply build a hotel. He built a system of disappearance, a place where trust turned fatal, where ambition turned blind, where dreams came to die in silence. And when the doors closed behind you, you were no longer a guest. You were property. You were already written into his ledger. Ask yourself, how many systems today are built the same way, appearing ordinary on the surface, but hiding machinery designed to consume the unsuspecting? Holmes' castle was not just a building. It was a prophecy. Holmes' manipulation extended far beyond bricks and mortar. He understood that the human mind was as pliable as clay in the hands of someone who spoke with charm, authority, and the illusion of trust. He preyed on those who believed in the promise of advancement, the lure of opportunity, and the innocence of hospitality. Women arrived at his castle seeking work, companionship, or a better life, unaware that Holmes' intentions were far darker than any office or hotel room should conceal. Julia Smythe, Emmeline Sigrand, Minnie Williams, and Nanny Williams, names that echo like ghosts in the alleys of Chicago and his orbit and vanished into his designs. He convinced them that safety, progress, and even affection were his to provide, while he simultaneously stripped them of agency, identity, and life. Some were poisoned. Some suffocated in hidden vaults. Some were buried alive in places no one would find them for years, if ever. Holmes' methodology was meticulous. He kept meticulous records of his lies, documented his schemes, and maintained multiple identities simultaneously. Each victim was a step in a larger architecture of deceit, a calculated removal of obstacles to his financial gain and personal control. Yet even the castle's horrors were not the apex of his cunning. Holmes turned accomplices into instruments of murder. Benjamin Pitezel, a man who trusted Holmes as a friend, became a pawn in an insurance fraud scheme that ended with Pitezel's death and the murder of his children. Holmes orchestrated their killings as if they were parts of a machine, calculated to avoid suspicion and maximize profit. He claimed innocence while meticulously documenting his acts, revealing a mind that combined foresight, obsession with control, and a disturbing detachment from morality. And while law enforcement struggled to trace the threads of his crimes, Holmes operated in plain sight, exploiting trust, ignorance, and greed at every turn. He was a master of camouflage, using charm and deception as armor, leaving only fragments behind bones, hair, burned clothing, or empty trunks as breadcrumbs for a world that would not fully understand him until too late. The psychological dimension of his crimes is chilling. Holmes did not merely kill. He created an ecosystem of fear, control, and silence. Each victim, each accomplice, and each lie was a component of a psychological web designed to entrap everyone who entered his orbit. Now, consider this. Every act, every disappearance, and every manipulation was deliberate. Nothing was accidental. You are witnessing the architecture of evil in motion. The blueprint of a mind that weaponized society itself to fulfill his obsessions. Are you ready to see what lies deeper still? By 1894, Holmes' network of deceit had reached a terrifying apex. He no longer needed to improvise. Every action was premeditated, every disappearance a calculated maneuver in a game only he knew the rules to. The Pitezel children, Nellie and Howard B. became instruments of his greed and cunning, entrusted to his care under the pretense of protection, while he meticulously plotted their deaths. In October of that year, Holmes lured the two girls into a trunk, drilled a hole, attached it to a gas line, and as their lungs filled with poison, he ensured their bodies would vanish without trace. Their nude remains were buried in the cellar of his Toronto rental, a grim echo of his ability to orchestrate life and death with mechanical precision. Howard Pitezel's fate was no less calculated. Holmes sharpened knives, arranged fire, and left teeth and bone fragments in a chimney, evidence hidden in plain sight, yet invisible to those who failed to question the ordinary. What is extraordinary here is not simply the acts of murder, but the scale of manipulation it required. Carrie Pitezel, their mother, believed her children were under his protection, while Holmes navigated across cities, posing under multiple identities, maintaining appearances, and continuing schemes to defraud insurance companies. It was a system of control so complete that reality itself bent to his will. And yet, as meticulous as Holmes was, his arrogance became a crack in the edifice. Frank Geyer, a Philadelphia detective, began tracing his steps, unearthing letters, skeletons, and half-hidden truths. Slowly, the illusion began to crumble, revealing that the man who had seemed untouchable was vulnerable to scrutiny and persistence. But here lies the deeper lesson. Holmes thrived because society enabled him at every level. Creditors, contractors, and even law enforcement were complicit in their silence, either blinded by money or indifferent to warning signs. The castle, the murders, the elaborate insurance scams, none of it could have succeeded in isolation. This was not chaos. It was a machine, fueled by both one man's genius for deception and a city's inability or unwillingness to question it. And as you consider these events, ask yourself, how many monsters operate today behind facades of legitimacy, hidden by institutions that pretend not to see? Holmes' story is not only a tale of murder, it is a masterclass in psychological control, a blueprint for understanding how power and deception intertwine, and how the ordinary can mask the extraordinary darkness beneath. Every step deeper into his world is a step further into a mirror that reflects the fragility of trust, the danger of blind obedience, and the terrifying consequences when ambition and morality collide. The descent has only just begun. Holmes' capture in Boston on November 17, 1894, marked the beginning of the unraveling, yet it also revealed how close he had come to disappearing completely into history, leaving his crimes unpunished and his victims forgotten. Tracked by the Pinkerton National Detective Agency, a private force of relentless investigators, Holmes was arrested on charges of horse theft, trivial accusation compared to the magnitude of his murders. This irony was not lost on him. A man who had orchestrated deaths with surgical precision was finally caught by a mundane law enforcement claim. Yet even in custody, Holmes remained the master manipulator. He calmly constructed stories, presented false identities, and charmed guards and fellow inmates alike. The castle, the Pitezel children, the missing women, he hinted at horrors without fully admitting them. A psychological game designed to maintain power even while imprisoned. His trial for the murder of Benjamin Pitezel became a theatre where the full extent of his cunning was exposed. Holmes confessed 27 murders, a number impossible to verify, taunting investigators with names, locations, and macabre details while simultaneously leaving ambiguities that would ensure his legend endured. These confessions were sold to newspapers for $7,500, transforming his criminal legacy into both a commodity and a spectacle. Yet Holmes' true genius was the interplay between truth, half-truth, and invention. Many of his alleged victims were alive. Some disappearances remained unresolved. Some deaths were manipulated to appear natural or accidental. He understood that narrative was as powerful as murder itself. Through media manipulation, legal loopholes, and the credulity of the public, Holmes shaped perception, ensuring that fear and fascination intertwined. This duality merging horror with charm, truth with fictions, the essence of forbidden knowledge. It forces us to question not only what we know, but how much of what we know is constructed, curated, or deliberately distorted. Holmes' mastery of this psychological space allowed him to escape moral consequences long enough to finalize his most audacious crimes, even as authorities began closing in. He existed in a liminal zone between reality and myth, where terror was hidden in plain sight, and normalcy was only a mask over devastation. And as you watch, you must ask yourself, how often do we mistake performance for truth, appearance for reality? Holmes teaches a harsh lesson: the world rewards the manipulative, punishes the naive, and often hides darkness behind everyday facades. His story is not just a historical curiosity, it is a blueprint of manipulation, a guide to understanding the dangerous intersections of intelligence, charm, and moral detachment. As we continue, you will see that the castle was only the beginning, the prelude to horrors that extend far beyond any single building. The castle had become more than a building. It was a psychological extension of Holmes himself, a living mechanism designed to reflect his obsession with control, death, and secrecy. Each hidden room, each labyrinthine corridor, each airtight vault was a manifestation of his mind, a structure where he could bend reality to his will, where victims became pawns, and where society's ignorance became a weapon. Employees, tenants, and visitors were drawn into a meticulously crafted theater of trust, unaware that every gesture, every smile, every contract was a thread in a web designed to ensnare them. The legend of the murder cassula, phrase coined by the sensationalist press, grew in parallel to the city's fascination with the 1093 World's Columbian Exposition. Tourists flocked to the fair, dazzled by the white marble palaces of progress, unaware that across the city, behind a modest storefront and the facade of commerce, darkness had taken root. Holmes understood the allure of spectacle. He exploited it, creating a dual reality, one of bustling, mundane activity, and another of calculated disappearance, where no one could tell the difference until it was too late. But even as the castle burned down, arsonists, flames consuming parts of the building after Holmes' arrests, the secrets within were not entirely destroyed. Charred floors, hidden vaults, and faint traces of human remains hinted at crimes that would never be fully documented. Holmes had engineered ambiguity, ensuring that fear and curiosity would survive long after he was gone. And there, in the ashes and embers, we see the deeper truth, that evil often relies not on flamboyant violence, but on silence, deception, and the complicity of those who look away. Those who entered the castle never saw the full scope of his planning, just fragments of a world constructed to hide his intentions. Even after his capture, the stories of what happened inside became a mixture of fact, conjecture, and myth, leaving a distorted reflection of reality in the public consciousness. Holmes' crimes were not only acts of murder, they were exercises in psychological warfare, demonstrations of how perception can be controlled, manipulated, and weaponized. And as you watch, consider this: the real terror is not just the man, or the murders, or even the castle itself. The terror lies in how ordinary systems, society, law, commerce, and human trust can be exploited by someone willing to understand their weaknesses and act without conscience. Holmes was not merely a killer, he was a teacher in the art of manipulation, showing us that the most dangerous truths are often hidden in plain sight, waiting for the observant, the curious, and the vigilant to uncover them. Now, as we descend further, prepare to witness the human consequences, the lost lives, and the psychological darkness that no fire, no confession, and no newspaper could ever fully erase. The victims of H. Holmes were more than numbers. They were living testimonies to the depth of his cruelty and the sophistication of his deceit. Julia Connor and her daughter, Pearl Emmeline Grand, Minnie and Nanny Williams H. Life extinguished was a calculated removal of obstacles, a step in a grand design of financial gain and psychological control. Holmes did not kill for thrill. Alone, he killed to preserve his empire of lies, to protect the fragile illusions he had built around himself. Consider the Pitezel children, 3 innocent lives handed over under the guise of guardianship, only to be led to their deaths in meticulously planned murders. Holmes orchestrated their disappearance with an almost surgical detachment. Alice and Nellie were confined in a trunk, asphyxiated with gas, and buried beneath the floors of a rental home in Toronto. Howard Pitezel was lured separately, killed, and dismembered, his remains hidden in a chimney, a gruesome echo of Holmes' mastery of concealment. And yet, it was not just physical death that defined his power. It was the manipulation of perception, the distortion of reality. Carrie Pitezel, their mother, was left believing her children were alive, hidden away in some foreign city. Holmes had constructed a narrative so convincing that it could survive scrutiny for months, until the relentless investigation of Frank Geyer, a Philadelphia detective, began to unravel it piece by piece. Each discovery, each skeletal fragment, was a key turning in the lock of Holmes' intricate deception, revealing a mind capable of engineering terror, controlling lives, and evading moral consequence with cold precision. But there is a lesson in this horror that transcends the specifics of Holmes' crimes. Evil is rarely instantaneous or random. It is methodical. It exploits trust, leverages social norms, and relies on the unsuspecting compliance of those who refuse to question appearances. In Holmes' case, his knowledge of anatomy, human behavior, and societal systems made him uniquely dangerous, but the framework of complicity, the courts, the creditors, the neighbors, the media, eager for sensationalism, allowed him to operate with impunity. As we peer deeper into his story, it becomes evident that the most terrifying truths are often hidden not behind locked doors or barred windows, but within the ordinary rhythms of society, commerce, bureaucracy, and human naivety. Holmes' murders were instruments of both profit and power, but also lessons in psychological domination. And as you follow this descent, understand that this is not a story contained in the past. It is a blueprint for manipulation, a mirror reflecting the vulnerabilities that exist within all systems and within ourselves. If we fail to recognize the signs, the castle, the lies, and the deaths are not merely history, they are warnings, whispering from the shadows of a world where appearance can kill and obedience can destroy. As the investigation into Holmes' crimes intensified, the true horror of his operations began to emerge, not only in the bodies he left behind, but in the meticulous planning that made him untouchable for so long. Holmes' genius was in his understanding of human systems, insurance companies, legal loopholes, social expectations, and in his ability to manipulate them to his advantage. He preyed on trust, greed, and desire, turning everyday institutions into tools of murder and deceit. The Pitezel scheme, where he orchestrated the death of a trusted accomplice and subsequently murdered 3 children under the guise of guardianship, exemplifies this mastery of manipulation. Holmes understood that human perception could be shaped and controlled. He used letters, misdirection, and physical distance to convince parents, creditors, and law enforcement alike that the children were alive, traveling, or safely hidden. And while the public and the press focused on the sensationalized horror of the murder castle, Holmes operated quietly, almost invisibly, in plain sight, exploiting the city's expansion and the influx of tourists during the world's Columbian Exposition. His crimes reveal a darker truth about society. Systems designed to protect and serve can be subverted by those who understand their mechanics better than anyone else. Banks, property registries, insurance firms, became a cog in Holmes' operation, each complicit in his concealment, not out of malice, but because they could not see the manipulation until it was far too late. This is the disturbing lesson that underlies all forbidden histories. Evil does not always announce itself with fanfare. Sometimes it grows quietly, structurally, within the very institutions we trust most. Holmes' castle, with its hidden vaults and locked rooms, was simply the physical manifestation of a mind that had mastered systems and human psychology alike. The missing women, the dismembered children, the false identities were evidence not just of brutality, but of intellect, patience, and strategic cunning. And yet, the story is incomplete without understanding the psychological warfare he waged over his victims. Holmes exploited relationships, feigned empathy, and constructed narratives that ensnared his targets before they even realized the danger. He weaponized trust, and in doing so, he created terror that extended far beyond physical violence. The castle, the murders, the confessions, they are all symbols of a larger truth. Manipulation, control, and the dark exploitation of systems can achieve what physical power alone cannot. As you watch, reflect on this. The structures around U.S. society, law, commerce are not inherently safe. And the most insidious predators are not always monsters in the shadows, but those who walk among us, studying, calculating, and waiting for the perfect opportunity to bend reality to their will. By understanding Holmes, you begin to recognize patterns, vulnerabilities, and the terrifying potential of unchecked cunning. Holmes' methods extended beyond murder into a terrifying mastery of psychological control, a skill that allowed him to manipulate both victims and accomplices with ease. Benjamin Pitezel, his trusted associate, was first enticed by promises of wealth and security, only to become a tool in Holmes' grand design. When Pitezel agreed to the insurance scheme, he unknowingly placed himself and his children directly into Holmes' grasp. Holmes orchestrated their deaths with methodical precision. Timing, geography, and deception were all instruments of control. He moved them across state lines, using aliases, fabricated stories, and calculated distractions to ensure that no one could trace his actions until it was too late. Every detail mattered: the route taken, the letters sent or withheld, the stories repeated to different witnesses. In this web, perception was reality, and Holmes was the master illusionist. The children, innocent and trusting, were confined, suffocated, and buried, while their mother, Carrie, believed them to be alive. This was not only physical murder, it was psychological torture on a scale few could imagine. Holmes' skill lay in understanding human expectation and exploiting it, turning ordinary actions into a theater of deception. He weaponized trust, turning the natural instincts of family, society, and law against itself. Even the police and detectives, trained to uncover evidence, found themselves ensnared by his cunning. Frank Geyer, a determined Philadelphia detective, would eventually piece together the fragments of Holmes' trail, uncovering the murders one revelation at a time. But the path was treacherous: corpses in trunks, skeletal remains hidden beneath floorboards, and documents carefully manipulated to create confusion. Holmes' castle itself was a psychological instrument. Every locked room, hidden passage, and labyrinthine hallway reflected the manipulations occurring in the minds of those he controlled. It is here we confront a chilling truth. The most insidious monsters do not simply kill, they orchestrate. They manipulate, they control perception. Holmes' legacy teaches that the mind is the ultimate battlefield, and that mastery over human expectation can amplify the horror of physical acts exponentially. This is why, even now, decades later, his story evokes fascination and fear. It exposes vulnerabilities we refuse to see in ourselves and the systems we rely upon. As you descend further into this history, understand that Holmes was not merely a murderer, he was a strategist of fear, an architect of deception, and a manipulator of human psychology. Each life lost was a demonstration of the terrifying potential of intellect untempered by morality. And as we continue, we will uncover how institutional failure, human naivety, and societal obsession with spectacle allowed his reign to flourish, leaving a legacy of horror that whispers from the shadows even today. The story of H. Holmes is as much about society's blindness as it is about his cunning. While he built his castle in Chicago, a city swelling with visitors for the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition, the infrastructure of trust banks, insurance companies, local authorities became unwitting collaborators in his deception. Holmes exploited the rush of commerce and human ambition, inserting himself into ordinary transactions and social systems, bending them toward his own ends. Consider the very institutions designed to prevent fraud, insurance companies. Holmes understood their procedures, their paperwork, their reliance on appearances. He faked deaths, staged accidents, and provided evidence that satisfied bureaucratic scrutiny, turning the mechanisms meant to protect against criminality into instruments of his scheme. And while the press sensationalized the castle with tales of torture chambers, gas vents, and secret passages, much of the reality was subtler, more terrifying: a killer who weaponized ordinary structures, who could move a person, a document, or a corpse through the city without detection. His murders of the Williams sisters and Pitezel children were only the most extreme examples of his manipulation. Every interaction, every investment, every relationship was part of a strategy to isolate, control, and exploit. Holmes' psychological dominance extended to his lovers and wives. He maintained multiple households simultaneously, each woman unaware of the others, each manipulated into complicity or ignorance through carefully constructed lies. In doing so, he revealed a disturbing truth about human behavior when confronted with a convincing narrative. Even intelligent individuals can be blindsided by the orchestration of deceit. The castle, in this context, becomes not merely a building but a singular representation of hidden systems of control, of the ways in which authority and trust can be subverted. For Holmes, murder was a tool, but deception was the weapon, and it was the combination of intellect, opportunity, and human compliance that allowed him to operate with impunity. As Frank Geyer traced the steps of the Pitezel children, he uncovered the terrifying scale of this manipulation, the way Holmes turned geography, documentation, and human expectation into instruments of death. Each room, each trunk, each carefully staged narrative reveals the depth of planning, the cold precision, and the ruthless understanding of human psychology. Holmes' story is a lesson in the darkness that can thrive where systems are trusted but not questioned. It is a warning that intelligence, untempered by conscience, can exploit the ordinary to achieve the extraordinary in evil. As you continue watching, recognize that Holmes' castle was never just a building, it was the embodiment of his mind. A labyrinth of deception, control, and death, where each secret unfolded another layer of forbidden knowledge. The question remains, how many more such monsters exist, walking unnoticed in the structures and routines around us? Holmes' manipulation of human systems was only matched by his understanding of fear itself. He didn't need to terrify to kill. He used subtlety, the quiet erosion of trust, to bend people to his will. Victims disappeared not because they were careless, but because Holmes created an environment where every decision, every move, every expectation worked against them. Take Minnie and Nanny Williams, sisters drawn into his orbit under the guise of employment and opportunity. Holmes systematically dismantled their autonomy, isolating them from family, creating a web of dependence and confusion. They trusted him, and in that trust, he found the key to absolute control. The world around them, the city streets, the hotel rooms, even the legal system was complicit in their disappearance, not through malice, but through unawareness. Holmes' mastery lay in exploiting this unawareness. His crimes a dark study of perception versus reality. Every letter he wrote, every name he assumed, every transaction he orchestrated was a psychological maneuver designed to keep the trail cold, the truth obscured. And yet, it was not just manipulation for gain. It was a demonstration of power, a thrill derived from bending systems and humans alike. This is the lesson that few dare acknowledge. Evil is amplified when it understands the rules better than those who enforce them. Holmes' castle, often misrepresented as a chamber of horrors filled with elaborate torture devices, was, in reality, a theater for the mind. Locked rooms, hidden compartments, and unconnected stairways were less about physical torture and more about the control of perception, creating a space where he could disappear behind doors and lies simultaneously. When law enforcement and investigators finally descended on the castle, they were met with fragments, burned clothing, disarticulated bones, letters, and false identities enough to hint at the truth, yet never fully satisfying the human desire for closure. Holmes' brilliance, terrifying in its scope, lay in orchestrating ambiguity, creating a labyrinth where the most basic truth, who lived and who died, was obscured, even to those charged with uncovering it. He weaponized ordinary tools, ordinary trust, and ordinary infrastructure to achieve extraordinary evil, demonstrating that horror is not always in what is seen, but in what remains hidden, in what goes unquestioned, in the spaces between assumption and reality. As we peel back another layer of this forbidden story, consider the implications. The systems we rely upon are vulnerable, not just to the reckless, but to the intelligent predator who understands them intimately. Holmes was that predator, a man who turned everyday human expectation into a weapon, and in doing so, taught a lesson about control, deception, and the terrifying potential of unchecked intellect. This is the darkness that whispers from the pages of history, a darkness we are only beginning to confront in its full, chilling form. The Pitezel children were perhaps the most damning testament to Holmes' complete domination over life and death. Alice, Nellie, and Howard Robert were not only victims of physical murder, but pawns in a meticulously crafted psychological game, manipulated for profit and control. Holmes exploited their innocence, their mother's trust, and society's assumptions about law and morality. By separating the children from their mother under false pretenses, he created an environment where their very existence could be erased without immediate suspicion. The logistics of their deaths reveal a mind operating with surgical precision. Gas lines, locked trunks, and calculated burial sites ensured that the act was both efficient and hidden. It was a lesson in invisibility and psychological terror. Holmes understood that killing someone is only part of the crime. The greater mastery lies in erasing their presence from the world, leaving doubt, uncertainty, and emotional chaos in the wake. Each child's disappearance was a performance in manipulation, as much about controlling the perceptions of their mother and the surrounding community as it was about the act itself. The forensic work that eventually uncovered the truth, the decomposition, the letters retained by Holmes, the clues left inadvertently, highlighted the gaps in societal oversight, the flaws in systems meant to protect the vulnerable. Holmes' ability to operate undetected was amplified by society's collective blindness, the assumption that appearances equaled reality, and that a respectable man with a practiced charm could not be capable of monstrous acts. Frank Gayer's painstaking investigation revealed not only the horrors Holmes committed, but also the terrifying ease with which one man could exploit the trust of many, leaving death and confusion behind. The castle, the letters, the false identities, and the manipulations of daily life, everything Holmes touched became part of a larger system of control. And here we see a disturbing principle. When intellect, cunning, and opportunity combine without moral constraint, the ordinary world becomes a stage for extraordinary evil. Holmes' story forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about the fragility of human systems and the susceptibility of minds to deception. The children's deaths were not only crimes, they were statements, demonstrations of dominance, lessons in fear, manipulation, and absolute control. Each layer of his actions strips away the illusion of safety, exposing the cold mechanisms by which a single individual can orchestrate chaos, suffering, and terror across multiple lives and jurisdictions. As we descend deeper into this forbidden history, understand that Holmes' legacy is more than murder. It is a blueprint of manipulation, a mirror reflecting our own vulnerabilities, and a warning of how evil can flourish when intelligence meets unchecked ambition. At this midpoint, pause and reflect. Where are you watching from? Type it in the comments now. Then, to acknowledge your descent into hidden knowledge, comment this symbolic phrase, "The shadow sees me twice." and claimed the understanding that comes from facing uncomfortable truths. Holmes' crimes were not limited to physical domination. They extended into the realm of financial and social manipulation, exploiting both institutions and individuals alike. Consider the intricate schemes he devised with Benjamin Pitezel, a man whose trust would ultimately become his undoing. Holmes' understanding of insurance systems allowed him to fabricate deaths and create financial gain from them, turning mortality itself into currency. Pitezel's own death, staged as part of an elaborate plan to collect insurance money, exemplifies the terrifying precision with which Holmes orchestrated his crimes. He used chloroform to incapacitate, fire to destroy evidence, and carefully documented deception to mask reality. The Pitezel children, innocent witnesses in this dark ledger, were drawn deeper into Holmes' machinations, becoming silent symbols of his capacity for cruelty and planning. His manipulation of Carrie Pitezel, the mother, demonstrates a psychological acuity that rivals his logistical genius. Holmes crafted narratives so convincing that adults believed the impossible, accepting falsehoods that would unravel only too late. Every lie, every forged document, every false identity was part of a psychological architecture designed to control perception. Holmes' brilliance lay in his ability to make the impossible appear routine, to normalize deception, and to exploit societal assumptions about trust and authority. While modern audiences may view his acts through the lens of horror, the reality is more chilling. A mind so attuned to human behavior, bureaucracy, and social expectation that he could navigate a city, manipulate the living, and erase the existence of the dead without immediate consequence. In the castle, in the streets of Chicago, in the offices of banks and insurance companies, Holmes created a system in which he alone understood the rules, bending them to his will. His interactions were calculated, his relationships performative, and his crimes hidden in plain sight, demonstrating a frightening truth. Evil is amplified when it operates within systems, exploiting their blind spots, their reliance on procedure, and their assumptions of honesty. Holmes' story forces us to confront an uncomfortable lesson about the human world. The frameworks we depend upon for protection can be weaponized against us by those who understand them better than we do. As the investigation by Frank Geyer and other authorities finally began to reveal fragments of truth, the scale of Holmes' deception became apparent, but the full horror remained elusive, hidden behind layers of meticulous planning. This is the essence of forbidden knowledge, that what seems ordinary, structured, and safe can conceal extraordinary darkness. As we continue, recognize that every system, every human connection, and every assumption is vulnerable to manipulation by a mind like Holmes. The danger lies not only in what he did, but in how easily the ordinary world became his instrument of terror. Holmes' Murder Castle has become a legend of macabre excess, yet its true horror lies not in the sensationalized tales of trapdoors and gas chambers, but in the quiet, insidious genius of its design. He constructed the building not merely to house victims, but to disorient, to control perception, to fragment reality itself. Doors opened to brick walls, staircases led nowhere, and hidden passages allowed Holmes to move unseen, creating an environment where uncertainty and fear could fester. Victims entered expecting hospitality, safety, and opportunity. They encountered instead confusion, isolation, and psychological submission. The castle was a physical manifestation of Holmes' Minder maze of deception, a theater of control, a place where human expectations could be manipulated and destroyed. The yellow press may have exaggerated its horrors, but the truth was already terrifying. The space itself was a tool of domination. Holmes understood that fear is most potent when it is invisible, when it creeps along the edges of perception, leaving the mind to fill in its own terrors. Every hidden compartment, every locked room, every false corridor was a lesson in psychological control, a demonstration of power over both environment and human behavior. He sold himself as a respectable businessman, a doctor, a hotelier, a man of opportunity, blending normalcy with menace so that those around him could not reconcile appearances with reality. The castle, in its quiet complexity, mirrored this duality, ordinary on the surface, extraordinary in its capacity for manipulation. Reports of secret torture devices, gas lines, and underground crematoria were sensationalized, but they obscured a more subtle truth. Holmes' genius was in making control invisible. The building became a weapon, an extension of his own intellect, allowing him to move unseen, manipulate perception, and orchestrate disappearances without immediate suspicion. When investigators finally entered, they found fragments of evidence-burned clothing, human remains, letters that hinted at the reality beneath the myth, yet could never fully reconstruct the extent of the horrors. The castle stood as a monument to the terrifying power of intellect unmoored from morality, a structure where human systems trust, law, commerce, and social expectation were instruments to be exploited. Holmes' manipulation of space, perception, and human psychology teaches a chilling lesson. Horror is not always in the visible, but in the unseen, the unexpected, the systematic control of reality itself. As you continue to descend into this story, remember that the true terror lies not in the myths, but in the very human vulnerabilities they exploit. Reflect on the spaces around you, the people you trust, and the systems you rely upon. They are the tools a predator like Holmes could bend to his will. This is forbidden knowledge, a reminder that the extraordinary darkness of history is not always hidden in shadows, but built into the structures and perceptions we take for granted. By 1894, Holmes' crimes had reached a scale that defies comprehension. Yet he remained a master of appearances, moving through Chicago, Philadelphia, and Toronto like a man untouched by suspicion. His web of aliases, business ventures, and personal relationships created a fog of confusion, making it nearly impossible for authorities to trace his true actions. Each murder, each disappearance, each fraudulent scheme was meticulously planned to exploit gaps in oversight, to take advantage of social and institutional blind spots. The Pitezel children were the culmination of this orchestration, victims not only of death but of a system manipulated to serve one man's ambition. Holmes' cruelty was not random, it was functional, strategic, and calculated. The choice of locations, the timing of events, the psychological manipulation of families and associates, every detail served to maximize control and minimize exposure. When Frank Geyer, the Philadelphia detective, began his investigation, he faced a labyrinth of deception, letters, false identities, and fabricated alibis that challenged the very notion of truth. Holmes had engineered an existence where he could commit murder, orchestrate fraud, and disappear into the everyday, leaving only fragments of horror behind. The bodies he left, the burned remains, the hidden letters, and the partially excavated skeletons were not only evidence, they were symbols of the extent to which one individual could dominate reality itself. It is here that we confront the terrifying intersection of intellect, opportunity, and moral vacancy. Holmes' actions reveal a psychological mastery that extends beyond simple criminality. He understood trust, perception, and human expectation as tools, wielding them with precision to erase lives, manipulate outcomes, and bend the law to his will. His story is not just about murder. It is about the exploitation of systemic weaknesses, the weaponization of societal norms, and the capacity of one individual to operate with near-complete impunity. Each disappearance, each forged document, each misdirected investigation was a layer in a dark architecture of control, revealing the fragility of institutions and the vulnerability of human judgment. As Gaia traced Holmes' steps across states and borders, uncovering the remains of Alice and Nellie Pitezel, the enormity of the crimes became clear, yet even then, the full scope remained tantalizingly out of reach. Holmes had created an intricate lattice of fear, deceit, and calculated invisibility, a blueprint for domination that challenges our assumptions about safety, morality, and the reliability of appearances. At this point, pause and reflect. Where are you watching from? Type it in the comments now. And remember to comment the symbolic phrase, "The shadow sees me twice," to mark your descent into understanding hidden truths. This is the moment when the horror of history is no longer distant, it becomes personal. A reflection of the systems and perceptions that govern your own world. The capture of H. Holmes in November 1894 was not the culmination of justice, but the first step in peeling back a horrifyingly intricate web of deception. Arrested in Boston, far from the sites of his most notorious crimes, Holmes seemed almost unruffled, his calm demeanor masking the enormity of his actions. The Pinkerton detectives and local authorities who tracked him discovered not only a man guilty of murder, but a mind that had systematically weaponized every social, legal, and psychological tool at his disposal. Holmes had perfected the art of misdirection, convincing acquaintances, business partners, and even law enforcement that he was a respectable doctor, an industrious hotelier, a concerned citizen. In reality, he had used these facades to manipulate outcomes, obscure his movements, and eliminate those who posed even the slightest threat. His trial for the murder of Benjamin Pitezel in Philadelphia exposed only a fraction of the horrors, but it revealed enough to shock a nation. A man capable of cold calculation, precise planning, and unfathomable cruelty. The methodical nature of the Pitezel children's murders, Alice, Nellie, and Howard, demonstrates the chilling intersection of intellect and inhumanity. Holmes had constructed a scenario where a mother's trust became his instrument, turning family bonds into mechanisms of deception. The forensic work of Frank Gaia, the meticulous detective who traced Holmes' steps across states and into Canada, revealed the hidden atrocities, decayed remains buried in rented houses, letters withheld to maintain lies, and evidence that painted a horrifying picture of manipulation at every level. Even as the castle burned and the sensationalist press clamored to mythologize the man, the underlying reality remained more terrifying than fiction. Holmes had exploited the very systems designed to prevent crime. Insurance companies, police procedures, and social expectations all became extensions of his will. He turned human perception against itself, making ordinary places, faces, and transactions conduits of terror. His calm, measured confession in prison, where he admitted 27 murders and multiple attempts, demonstrates the final layer of control, the ability to narrate his own story, to shape his own legacy, and to obscure the true extent of his crimes. As we descend deeper into this forbidden history, recognize that Holmes' genius lies not merely in killing, but in understanding humanity so completely that he could manipulate reality itself. Every institution, every trust, every expectation can be weaponized by a mind that comprehends the unseen currents beneath society's surface. In revealing Holmes' story, we confront a terrifying truth. Evil does not always announce itself. Often, it thrives quietly in plain sight, waiting for the blind spots, assumptions, and vulnerabilities of the world to do its work. Holmes' time in prison was a continuation of his manipulative genius, a stage on which he could control narrative, perception, and fear even from behind bars. He corresponded with journalists, lawyers, and law enforcement, offering confessions in exchange for payment, shaping public understanding of his crimes while carefully omitting inconvenient details. Every word he wrote, every story he told, was designed to maintain dominance over his own legend, to obscure the true number of his victims, and to maintain a sense of awe and terror around his persona. He revealed methods of murder, yet allowed ambiguity to persist, letting society fill the gaps with horror, speculation, and rumor. The castle, the victims, the hidden passages became part of a legend that Holmes curated, turning sensationalist journalism to his advantage. In this period, he was not merely a murderer. He was a puppeteer of perception, demonstrating that controlling knowledge can be as powerful as controlling life itself. Even as the public read of The Beast of Chicago and Devil in the White City, they were experiencing a version of reality. Holmes had shaped a story where the horror was as much psychological as physical. His calm demeanor, the meticulous organization of his confessions, and his insistence on payment for his revelations reveal a mind acutely aware of the value of terror and information. Holmes' execution, delayed and anticipated, became an extension of this performance of final act in which control over perception and consequence was paramount. He dictated the terms of his burial, requesting a concrete coffin buried deep to prevent body snatching, a final assertion of dominance over both life and death. Beyond the sensationalist headlines, beyond the burned remains and fragmented evidence, lies a lesson in human vulnerability. Systems meant to safeguard life and truth can be manipulated by knowledge, charisma, and careful planning. Holmes understood human psychology, the desire to trust, the tendency to assume normalcy, the blind spots in institutions, and weaponized these vulnerabilities with terrifying precision. Each victim, each lie, each falsified identity demonstrates the dark potential of intellect unmoored from conscience. His story challenges assumptions about safety, morality, and the efficacy of law and order, forcing us to confront uncomfortable truths about what can be hidden in plain sight. As you process this descent into forbidden history, understand that Holmes' legacy is more than murder. It is an exploration of systemic weakness, the malleability of perception, and the terrifying efficiency of a mind operating without ethical constraint. Reflect on the structures around you, the rules you trust, and the faces you accept at their word, for even in today's world, the shadow of manipulation, deception, and calculated evil still moves unseen. Comment below if you feel the weight of these truths, and share where you are watching from to mark your place in this unfolding story. The full horror of H. Holmes' crimes is only truly grasped when we examine the layers of deception, exploitation, and psychological manipulation he wielded like weapons. Holmes did not kill for passion or rage. He killed to control, to profit, and to maintain a meticulously constructed illusion of normalcy. Each identity he assumed, each relationship he cultivated, was a calculated move in a broader game, a game where the stakes were human lives and the rules were dictated entirely by him. His victims, mistresses, business partners, children were not chosen at random. They were selected for their vulnerabilities, their trust, their inability to see the predator lurking behind the charm and professionalism. Holmes' understanding of human nature was profound. He knew how people wanted to believe, how institutions assumed compliance, and how fear could be manipulated through absence and silence. The murder castle, burned and sensationalized, stands as a monument not just to his crimes, but to the architectural embodiment of his mind, a labyrinth designed to confuse, isolate, and terrify. Even the most hardened investigators of his time struggled to separate myth from reality, a testament to Holmes' ability to manipulate perception. Beneath the sensationalist reporting, we see a deeper pattern, a systematic dismantling of trust in the institutions and social networks around him. Insurance companies, contractors, employees, even families were all drawn into his web, each believing in the facades he carefully maintained. The Pitezel children's deaths exemplify the cold calculation of his methods, a mother's trust, a father's absence, and the assumption that a criminal could not move undetected through multiple cities became the tools of murder. As Frank Geyer traced Holmes' steps across Chicago, Detroit, Toronto, and beyond, uncovering remains and letters, the true scale of manipulation became apparent. Holmes had turned time, geography, and social expectation into instruments of his will, creating a sense of inevitability that trapped his victims before they even understood the danger. His confessions, collected in prison, were themselves exercises in control, revealing, concealing, and shaping the narrative to cement his legend. In studying Holmes, we confront not only a murderer but an architect of fear, deception, and systemic exploitation. His crimes reveal the terrifying potential for intellect and strategy to operate without moral constraint, and they force a reflection on the fragility of the systems we trust. Pause here, consider the depth of this manipulation, and engage. Comment "The shadow sees me" twice to affirm your passage through this history, and write where you are watching from to connect with this dark journey. Remember, what you have witnessed is not just a story of murder, it is a masterclass in control, perception, and the hidden mechanisms of human vulnerability that persist even today. Holmes' influence extended far beyond the walls of the murder castle, reaching into the everyday lives of those who believed they were safe, protected by institutions, families, or society itself. He understood that fear could be wielded as quietly as a blade, that the threat of exposure, of disappearance, could manipulate more effectively than violence alone. His manipulation of Benjamin Pitezel and the subsequent murders of the Pitezel children are a stark example. He transformed trust into a weapon, orchestrating a scenario where family, law, and social expectation became complicit in his crimes. Holmes' genius lay in exploiting these blind spots, the predictable patterns of human trust, the assumption that professionals act professionally, the belief that a doctor, a businessman, a husband could be relied upon. In this way, he weaponized not only his intellect but the very systems designed to prevent crime. The investigative work of Frank Geyer, tracing Holmes from Philadelphia to Toronto and uncovering the bodies of Alice and Nellie, demonstrates the painstaking unraveling of this web. Yet even then, so much remained obscured: the identities of some victims, the true scale of the castle's horrors, the full extent of Holmes' manipulations across cities. As we examine his confessions, we see a man who not only killed but curated terror as a form of legacy. Each story he told, each method he revealed, was chosen to ensure that fear followed him beyond the act itself. Holmes' calm, deliberate persona masked a mind entirely devoted to control of a life, death, perception, and history itself. Even the fires that damaged the castle in 1895, which might have destroyed evidence, can be viewed as part of the pattern. Chaos and destruction carefully navigated to serve his purposes. Every investigation, every newspaper article, every sensationalized claim became part of a system he could manipulate. In understanding Holmes, we confront a disturbing truth about human institutions. No system is infallible, and even the most visible structures, police, law, journalism, can be turned to serve the ambitions of a cunning mind. He thrived in these gaps, exploiting trust, expectation, and ignorance to achieve outcomes most could not imagine. As you absorb this descent into the forbidden history of Holmes' reign, reflect on the unseen forces that operate in your own world. Consider where trust is assumed, where systems are relied upon, and where perception blinds truth. Now, as part of this engagement with hidden realities, comment "The shadow sees me twice" and share where you are watching from, marking your passage through this exploration of manipulation, death, and human vulnerability. Remember, the darkness Holmes navigated was not only physical, it was systemic, psychological, and enduring, and it continues to hold lessons for those willing to see. The final days of H. Holmes reveal a chilling combination of calm calculation and obsession with control, even in the face of death. As his execution approached, Holmes meticulously orchestrated his legacy, ensuring that every detail of his demise, every rumor, and every confession served to magnify his power beyond the grave. He arranged for his coffin to be encased in concrete, buried deep, demonstrating a morbid foresight aware of body snatchers. Obsessed with the permanence of his physical presence even after death, in the moments before the hanging, his demeanor remained eerily composed, a stark contrast to the fear and desperation that typically accompany imminent execution. Witnesses reported a man almost serene, observing the world with a detached curiosity, as if death was simply another problem to be solved, another mechanism to be manipulated. The execution itself, slow and excruciating as his neck did not break, became part of the psychological legend Holmes had constructed. He transformed pain, mortality, and public spectacle into a final assertion of control, a living demonstration that the mind could dominate circumstances even when the body could not. Beyond the mechanics of murder, beyond the sensationalist headlines and the charred remains of the castle, lies the profound lesson of Holmes' life. True power is often invisible, hidden in strategy, patience, and the manipulation of perception. The systems around him, legal, social, institutional, were tools, not barriers, in his elaborate design. Even after death, Holmes' influence lingered in the cultural consciousness, in the stories we told, in the psychological terror he inspired in generations of true crime scholars, law enforcement, and curious minds alike. The castle itself, burned and reconstructed, stands as a haunting reminder that buildings, objects, and structures can bear witness to human evil, holding secrets long after the perpetrators are gone. Investigators, journalists, and the public learned a harsh truth: intellect without conscience, charm without morality, and strategy without ethics can create chaos that survives beyond immediate comprehension. Holmes' manipulation of reality, his curation of horror, and his exploitation of trust reveal how vulnerable humans are to those who understand systems, human behavior, and fear. In studying Holmes, we are forced to confront the uncomfortable truth that evil is not always blatant, that control can be quiet, pervasive, and invisible. As we approach the conclusion of this descent into one of America's darkest criminal histories, remember that knowledge, perception, and fear are tools that can be weaponized by those who understand them. Comment below "The Shadow Sees Me Twice" and reveal where you are watching from, anchoring your passage through this forbidden journey. This is more than a story of murder. It is a study of manipulation, systemic vulnerability, and the haunting legacy of a mind that transcended morality to impose its will upon the living. Holmes' legacy is not confined to the crimes he committed or the sensationalist headlines he inspired. It is embedded in the shadows of every system he exploited, every trust he violated, and every societal blind spot he illuminated. The story of H. Holmes is, in essence, a blueprint of manipulation, a masterclass in the exploitation of human psychology, institutional weakness, and the blind spots of perception. He demonstrated that intelligence untempered by morality can bend reality to its will, that charm and calculation can disarm suspicion, and that the most horrifying truths often hide in plain sight. The murder castle, often romanticized or exaggerated in popular lore, was less a house of torture than a symbol of his mind, labyrinthine, deceptive, and meticulously designed to control the flow of information, access, and ultimately, life itself. Every missing person, every insurance scam, every carefully constructed alias was a thread in a web that Holmes controlled with near-absolute precision. The Pitezel murders, which became the case that finally secured his conviction, reveal the strategic cruelty he weaponized familial bonds, innocence, and institutional trust to achieve his ends, turning even the natural protections of society into instruments of his violence. But beyond the facts, beyond the sensational, there lies the psychological lesson. Holmes' crimes force us to question the structures we depend upon, the assumptions we make about safety, and the invisible mechanisms of power that can be turned against us. He understood human fear and used it not only as a means of control, but as a currency for influence, gaining leverage over people, systems, and perception itself. Even after his death, the fascination with Holmes endures because he represents a truth society prefers to ignore. Evil can be methodical, strategic, and terrifyingly rational. The headlines, the myths, the fabricated horrors of the castle all are part of the enduring story because they reflect a deeper discomfort, that a single mind, operating with intelligence, patience, and moral indifference, can disrupt the assumptions of an entire society. As we conclude this descent into forbidden knowledge, recognize that the story of H. Holmes is not merely historical, it is instructive, a cautionary tale of what happens when intellect is divorced from conscience, when perception is manipulated, and when society underestimates the calculated, silent predator. Take a moment to reflect and engage with this narrative. Comment "The Shadow Sees Me Twice" and share where you are watching from, marking your own passage through this dark history. What you have witnessed is more than crime. It is an exploration of power, fear, and control, lessons that remain relevant in every corner of life, where trust and perception can be weaponized by those who understand the hidden rules of human behavior. The darkness of Holmes' legacy persists because it is a mirror of human vulnerability, a mirror that compels us to confront the shadows within ourselves and the systems we rely upon. As we reach the final descent into the forbidden history of H. Holmes, understand this: what you have witnessed is not just a tale of murder. It is a study of human vulnerability, institutional blindness, and the terrifying potency of a mind untethered by conscience. Holmes was not merely a killer, he was a master of perception, a manipulator of systems, a predator who weaponized trust, curiosity, and societal norms to construct a legacy of horror that persists over a century later. The sensationalized stories of the murder castle, the charred remains, the hidden rooms, and the countless alleged victims are all symbols of his methodology: confusion, fear, and control, engineered to create a world in which he could operate above suspicion, above morality, above consequences. Yet beyond the myths, the verified murders, the Pitezel children, Julia Connor, Minnie and Nanny Williams, revealed the calculated cruelty of a mind that understood the fragility of human expectation. Holmes' story is a mirror. It exposes how systems fail when intellect, charm, and malevolence intersect, how fear can be orchestrated silently, and how reality itself can be manipulated to hide unspeakable truths. The investigators, the journalists, even the families of victims, all were pawns in a game they did not understand until it was too late. And that is the forbidden knowledge he leaves us. Evil is rarely brazen. It is patient, strategic, and often invisible until the consequences manifest. As you reflect on these revelations, recognize that Holmes' life is a lesson in vigilance, perception, and the dangers of underestimating the hidden capacities of the human mind. It is a warning that power, intellect, and control, when divorced from morality, can produce a darkness that persists long after the body is gone, long after the headlines fade, long after the castle itself has crumbled into history. Now, as you emerge from this journey through Chicago's darkest corners, the question remains: how much of what you see, trust, and accept in the world around you is shaped by forces you cannot perceive? How often do systems designed to protect, govern, or guide become instruments of manipulation, exploitation, and hidden agendas? The story of H. Holmes challenges you to see beyond appearances, to question institutions, and to understand that intelligence and cruelty can combine to produce horrors that defy imagination. If this journey has stirred your mind, if it has awakened a recognition of hidden truths and the fragility of trust, engage with it fully. Like this video, share it, and subscribe to explore further into forbidden histories that reveal the secrets no one was meant to hear. Remember, the shadows you have walked with Holmes are not confined to the past. They exist wherever systems, human nature, and ambition intersect. Be vigilant, be aware, and never underestimate the darkness a single mind can impose upon the world.